As the visitor draws the foot-long claw from his pocket, the scientist's heart begins to race. Rummaging through her mental catalog of anatomy, Dr. Angela Milner recognizes it in a flash. This claw belonged to a huge, flesh-eating dinosaur. But that's all she knows, because nothing quite like it has ever been seen. It's not that dinosaurs don't occur in Britain. They were a British invention, after all. The first dinosaurs to introduce themselves to science were collected from the English countryside. With luck, some fell into the laps of perceptive British anatomists. These were eccentric, mutton chop-wearing men, consumed by the mysteries of Earth history. In an early effort to make sense of the strange creatures, one of these chaps coined the very word, dinosaur. But even after 140 years worth of discoveries, no animal fit for a claw such as this had surfaced. This is new. Is there more of it? As Milner presses the visitor for details, he explains that it was not he, but his father-in-law that made the discovery. She insists that she meet him, and that she see from exactly where the claw came. She and Alan Charig drive from London's Natural History Museum to suburban Surrey to seek out the 59-year-old William Walker, a plumber by trade, fossilist at heart. Possessed by fossils, and owner of a proud set of mutton chops himself, Walker stands like a time-traveling member of that extinct breed of Victorian naturalists. Thrilled, Walker leads them to a brick mining pit. Apparently, he had just been walking around when he chanced upon a stone that bore a streak of brown bone. After delivering a good crack from his hammer, he stood in shock at the foot-long claw that spilled out before him. But now, a month later, he can't seem to relocate exactly where that happened. Bulldozers have beaten them to the site and have chewed through the terrain. They assume the worst. Just then, the plumber's eye catches some bone chips in the mud. Beneath are larger chunks of churned up, bulldozed bone. The claw was not an isolated piece. There's more of the monster buried. A lot more. Charig and Milner returned that May, armed with the full cooperation of the brick company and an excited crew. But when they shovel the mud out of the way, they're not met with a pristine skeleton sprawled out in a forgiving sediment. Instead, they find a patch of lumpy stones, concretions like the one that cradled the claw. Confident that the surviving bones are in the blocks, they salvage each one, all 2 tons worth. The excavation takes 17 days in all, but the detailed work of freeing individual bones in the lab would consume 6 years. Word of the mystery dinosaur, a find that Alan Charig would later call the most important fossil find in Europe or Britain this century, spreads around the world. It's not every day that new kinds of giant, flesh-eating dinosaurs are scooped up from a London suburb. As images of the claw circulate, some experts are reminded of the infamous sickle claw for which Velociraptor and its relatives are famous. This evokes thoughts of a supersized British raptor, but the story this fossil has to tell is much more interesting. As piece after precious piece appears, the skeleton quickly becomes the most intact carnivorous dinosaur ever found in Britain. And because all charismatic fossils yearn for a good nickname, Charig and Milner call theirs claws. Just as the greatest prize of any game animal is, of course, the head, so it is with the extinct, and claws is happy to oblige. By the 1980s, finds from around the world were showing that flesh-eating dinosaurs were spectacularly diverse. While their skulls differed in the details, large predatory dinosaurs all had deep, rounded-off muzzles. But the face smiling back from the rock in London's Natural History Museum does not adhere to any such pattern. It is an alien. By 1986, 3 years after Walker's discovery, about 70% of the fossils have been exposed. In the pages of the prestigious journal Nature, Charig and Milner introduce Baryonyx walkeri to the world. Baryonyx derives from the Greek barus, meaning heavy, and onyx for claw. The second name honors the keen-eyed William Walker. For him, it's the thrill of a lifetime to have a dinosaur named after him. When someone finds a new organism, it's not enough to just slap a name on it and call it a day. That's a start, but it's a crime against biology to orphan new additions to the tree of life. So the biologist must find a home for their new organism, a distinct twig. Ever since Charles Darwin and Alfred Wallace showed that all species descend from the same distant ancestor and are therefore knitted together into a great tree of life, It's been one of biology's primary goals to reveal the shape of this network. On which twig does the new species belong? Hard to say, because the tree has so many limbs and is lush beyond words and tall as could be. Fortunately, DNA can do much of the heavy lifting for living creatures, spilling volumes about who is related to whom. But the dinosaurs have left behind nothing to work with but their hard, skeletal anatomy, and so begins the long and tedious process of comparison. While Baryonyx is strange, it's got a lot more in common with beasts like Allosaurus and Tyrannosaurus than with anything else. And there's a home for carnivorous dinosaurs, and it's called the Theropoda. It's a thick limb from which about a third of all dinosaur species dangle. Smaller offshoots anchor clusters of closely related species. These are called families. The family Tyrannosauridae, for instance, was invented to account for T-Rex and its closest relatives. Here you'll find a set of unnerving brutes, animals bearing small, two-pronged arms and monstrous, bone-crushing jaws. They share these traits for precisely the same reason that siblings resemble their parents, because these species come from the same genetic stock, a parent species or common ancestor. Tyrannosauridae is but one family in the Theropoda, and when Charig and Milner try to find a place for Baryonyx, they run into trouble. There are no families it can be placed into without sticking out like a sore thumb claw. So they do what a good taxonomist is supposed to under the circumstances. They create a new family to house it and its close relatives, should they appear. For the time being, though, Baryonyx stands alone as the sole member of the Baryonychidae. What's so special about this creature? What warrants the invention of an entirely new family? Well, as mentioned, the skull is freakish, so aberrant that some questioned if it was even a dinosaur at all. The bones of the snout interlock to form a wavy tooth row, culminating in a hooked tip. The arched jaw slots neatly into the kink above, forging a sturdy clasp on writhing prey. Charig and Milner call this peculiar arrangement of teeth and jaws a terminal rosette. The most massive teeth are stationed in this rosette, making for one ruthless meat trap. Speaking of teeth, Baryonyx has a lot of them, more than any other theropod. While those in the lower jaws had broken free, each side has 32 sockets, twice as many as the famous Allosaurus. While Allosaurus had thin, recurved teeth, serrated front and back, Baryonyx has a mouthful of pegs. These are thick, more straightened, and anchored by incredibly deep roots. The crowns are traversed by serrations fine to the point of being microscopic. Even their texture is zany. A tapestry of strange wrinkles etches this toothscape, while ridges run up and down their length like the fluting on a Hellenic column. The long, bony nostril is pulled far from the front of the skull, yet another curious deviation from more vanilla theropods. A thin comb of bone ascends from this beast's forehead, completing its devilish character. A few of their peers accused Charig and Milner of having this thing all wrong. This was not the face of a dinosaur, they say, but a Cretaceous crocodile that was buried and preserved alongside one. But Charig and Milner know what they have. Despite the likeness, this is no crocodile. The rest of the animal is anomalous too. The neck bones fail to string together into the standard theropod S-curve. Instead, it has more of a crescent-shaped neck posture. The upper arm bone, while somewhat flattened on the ends, is hugely broad, surely a sign of a well-muscled arm. And that massive claw isn't just big for other dinosaurs, it's big for Baryonyx, too. At first, it was tempting to assume that such a giant claw was only fit for a theropod of mythical heft. But while this claw is bigger than that of the 8.5-meter Allosaurus, Baryonyx on the whole is less massive. This talon is a proportional monstrosity. If you've never heard of Baryonyx, take a moment to reflect on these characteristics. Recall the placement of the nose, the meat-trap jaws, the numerous gripping teeth. Consider its robust arms and colossal claw. Ask yourself, what sort of prey was Baryonyx after? We'll return to this later. It's worth noting that this perplexing snout isn't totally unique among theropods. In fact, it reminds Charig and Milner of another critter that would later become famous for its poison-spitting cameo in Jurassic Park. At more than 20 feet long, Dilophosaurus was among the first truly large theropods. Known from Arizona's 190 million year old early Jurassic rocks, it preceded Baryonyx by about 70 million years, living at a time when the supercontinent Pangaea first began shearing itself apart in earnest. That kink in the snout is hard to ignore, as is the fact that both bore bony accoutrements on their heads. Could Baryonyx have been a late surviving relative of Dilophosaurus? Charig and Milner say no. They prefer convergent evolution as an explanation, leaving the origins of Baryonyx murky as ever. But dissenting views about the animal's identity and the existence of the Baryonychid family are raised almost as soon as Baryonyx is set loose. Artist Greg Paul, to whom we can credit much of how our image of dinosaurs has been shaped, is among the critics. Baryonyx appears on his radar just as he's preparing to publish his now classic volume on predatory dinosaurs. It's so strange that he postpones the book. Famous for his skeletal reconstructions, Paul produces a rendering of a full Baryonyx skeleton, running at a full sprint. The drawing is a preliminary one, he warns, that will need replacing when the full description comes out. Despite having never seen the specimen in person, he protests to some of Charig and Milner's conclusions. He finds the similarities between their animal and Dilophosaurus more convincing. Paul believes that the two shared a loose ancestor-descendant relationship. He goes as far as to model the British creature's missing parts, including its absent tail, after that of Dilophosaurus. Now, time has not treated this hypothesis kindly, as today they are no longer believed to be close relatives. But Dilophosaurus aside, Paul thinks that Baryonyx is not the only creature of its kind. He and a leading French paleontologist independently arrive at the same conclusion, that Baryonyx is not alone in the theropod empire. Another species, survived only by a few drawings published in an obscure German journal at the height of the First World War, may hold the key to making sense of this croc-snouted dinosaur. This forgotten creature was the greatest contribution of an adventurous gentleman scientist, a man who lived to see his life and career crumble around him. It was the most cryptic dinosaur fossil ever found. Its dimensions were unparalleled. Its back was adorned with humongous spines, but no living paleontologist had set their eyes on it. The bones do not reside in any museum. The one and only specimen was destroyed long ago amid the chaos of the Second World War. And like much that is wild in this world, it came from Africa.